Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CPAC Live. Today, we have a great show for you, starting with someone in the halls of the Senate who is a real conservative champion with an American Conservative Union rating of 95% last year. That's pretty dang good. Senator James Lankford, thanks for being with us.
Glad to be with you again.
Well, I have been consuming a lot of news over the weekend about how Oklahoma is having some kind of amazing outbreak of Chinese corona, as people say that the president having a rally is going to make Oklahomans sick, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. You're from Oklahoma. The president's coming to Tulsa. Is this a health problem, or is this just getting back life to normal?
Yeah, this is getting life back to normal. I think what we're hearing is political chatter more than health chatter in this. We do need to pay attention to our health. We do need folks that are at high risk to continue to be able to be on extra guard, to be able to make sure they're away from folks that could transmit the virus for them. But Oklahoma has been through stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 and completed stage 3 of reopening. So we've come a very long way in this process, and we're not like a lot of other states. That we've had lower numbers here, thankfully, and we're ready to be able to welcome the president.
And doesn't it also mean, and I know as a member of the Senate, you're privy to a lot of information, but isn't it also true that, yes, there's this question about more people can test positive, but that's a function of the fact that there's a lot more tests. And number two, the survival rate from this virus continues to be sky high.
Yeah. So what we've seen in Oklahoma in just the last couple of weeks, in the last week, our numbers have gone up. Even our percentage of positive numbers have gone up. We are testing a lot more. We're finding some more at this point. So our percentages have changed also. But what has been interesting on it is our death rates have continued to remain exceptionally low. Our hospitalization rates are continue to be exceptionally low. And so there is something going on as we're tracking this. To be able to determine that as well. I just encourage people, if you're high risk, continue to be able to keep a safe distance. But for other folks, we are slowly trying to be able to re-engage with some caution.
And do you think that my reaction to the media coverage of the president starting up his rallies again, starting in Tulsa, moving on to Florida, going to Arizona and other states, why do you think the media wants to hype the story that we might need to have another shutdown?
So the media absolutely wants the economy to be able to collapse. That's their biggest challenge. We're watching right now a V-shaped recovery in our economy. We're obviously, when everything shut down for a time period, we watched the economy just collapse. And now we've seen department store sales are higher than what it was before everything stopped. Additional things like groceries and all kinds of other purchases have gone higher. Restaurants and lodging is still lower, but they're on a rapid increase at this point. So we're seeing a quick, rapid response. That's a worst case scenario for the liberal media. They want to be able to hold this down, and they absolutely don't want the president to be out there doing rallies because they know that that's been a successful strategy for the president. It gathers a lot of enthusiasm. It gathers a lot of engagement. They're trying to stop engagement of the president's party. At this point, people are protesting. People are doing political rallies. People are going to restaurants and shopping in stores. People are out again. People voice their opinion the national media doesn't like.
So we're going to talk in the second part of the show a little bit about the foster care system and kids at risk. You've been a pastor before you came to the Senate. You've done a lot of work with families and with kids. When you shut down the economy, when people lose their jobs, when people feel less hope, when they're worried about their health, what kind of impact does it have on kids and families?
Yeah, I'm somebody that's worked on families for a very long time. This is a big deal and a big challenge. So let me try to both sides of this. I've had a lot of families that have said they have absolutely loved getting focused time shut in with their kids, have had lots of hard conversations, have had lots of catch-up time. It's been a real blessing to some families, though they hate to talk about it because they know the devastation of the economy. And obviously for those that have the COVID virus, have had a bad reaction, they know the issues there. But for a lot of families, it's been a very significant moment. But this has also brought out a dark side as well. We have an increasing in domestic violence. We have an increase in anger and what's happening across many communities, and we have some families pushing away from each other. So if I could say it, good families are getting better, bad families are struggling even more, and it's exposing that to us. So as a community, as neighbors and neighborhoods, we have a responsibility to be able to reach out. This is not as much a legislative issue as it is a church issue, as a family issue, as a neighborhood community issue. What can we do to be able to walk alongside these families and to be able to walk through a very, very difficult time? And will now also be a very difficult time based on the economics as some families struggle with the economy.
You know, my mom and my siblings watched this show Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And, but we didn't come from a very perfect family, and we needed to have help from people in the government from time to time, including police officers. As families have more friction, as drug and alcohol abuse incidents go up, as parents feel a great responsibility for their kids, but see parts of their life slipping away, that's when the first responders and the cops have more of an interaction with families too. So it's kind of like devilish that at the time that families are feeling stress, there's also this political pushback on the people in our government whose job it is to step in these situations.
Yeah, that is one of the key issues. That's one of the most difficult issues out there. Law enforcement will tell you it's really hard when they step into a domestic disturbance because they don't know what's happening behind that door, and they're not going to be able to fix it. It's risen to a moment that they need parties just to be able to be separated and to be able to talk to a counselor, to be able to engage with a social worker, to be able to connect with their church, with their pastor, whatever it may be. But suddenly it's in the hands of law enforcement. That's not something that law enforcement pursues. That's something they would love to see different on that. And as much as we can have families engage early to we're having struggles to avoid that moment is the best possible moment that we can have. I tell people all the time, we have 3 safety nets in America. The first safety net is our families. The second safety net are churches and nonprofits. The third safety net is the government. By the time the problems rise so much that it gets to government, it's really, really difficult at that point. Our best place to be able to deal with the most difficult issues in life are in our families and our churches and nonprofits. That's a much better spot than when it has to get to government at the end.
We went to church as a family in person for the first time since CPAC. And, because we were in on this early after the CPAC experience. And it's emotional. It's emotional that the government had the ability to shut down our churches. And it was very emotional for me, and I think for my family, to be back in a pew. I don't think much good comes out of shutting down churches. What's been the experience in Oklahoma?
Yeah. So my church has been open for 3 weeks. It's been very nice to be able to be back in church again. Gathering with people. There's something very important in the Christian faith that I'm in, very important about gathering and of community. That is a basic discipline of gathering together to be able to encourage each other. So it's been really good to have. So let me do the flip side of that, Matt. Many churches that I've talked to have said when they shifted to online, they had a lot of new people that engaged that started watching their church. Several of the churches that I've talked to have said they've had 10 times more viewers than they used to have people sitting on Sunday morning. So quite a few churches that had not done the work to get up to speed to do streaming of their services now have been pushed in such a way that they're going to get back to doing live services and they're going to do streaming. And just from my own personal faith perspective, I would tell you, I think God's going to take something bad and is going to use it for good long term, that the church is going to continue to be able to reach out in new ways that they just weren't doing before.
I love your message because in my family, we have felt the stress, but we've also had a lot more meals together. We've done a lot more praying together. My brother-in-law started a rosary that's ongoing. Some members of our board started a prayer time as well. We've had these wonderful family moments, but yet underneath it is this angst about, will they open school? Can we go to church again? What's going to happen in the economy? I love the fact that you're talking about churches being pushed to evangelize better by going online and making it available, because even the vulnerable populations will, they'll be pushed back further from coming back. And CPAC, Senator, we're doing this show out of frustration of what we were watching on television, right? And what we were reading. We felt like conservatives couldn't hear a balanced approach to the hysteria over Chinese corona. And so this is born. So I think you're right. I think out of all this stress, we're going to have brand new entrepreneurs with ideas that are going to take off, and they're going to have wealth, and they're going to invest in the country. And maybe some of us will change our ways for the better.
Yeah, I think not only we can, we should. This has been a good push for us to be able to push out and to do the things that we should have done a long time ago. And I think we'll continue to be able to do that. But again, we are a people of freedom that like to be able to be together, that like to be able to speak out. It's been interesting that the public media doesn't have a problem with peaceful protests getting out there to be able to gather. They just have a problem with conservative voices getting out there in a rally.
Well, yeah,
so we get both sides.
I don't know if you took this in school, but apparently these viruses are only passed on by conservatives. They're worried about an outbreak now that the Trump rallies are starting again. Of course, we took it on the chin for CPAC, and you can have protests, violent protests in cities, and they say, well, that's really had no effect on the virus. So I think most Americans, or at least half of the country, a little more than half, get the joke on all this. They can see how biased the coverage is. Now, the real question is, with all of what's gone on, an economic shutdown on the heels of this virus, now we have these racial animosities, which are just tragic, or dealing with a more modern version of them. Senator, will the Senate change?
Will the Senate change? Never.
I know it's a completely unfair question. Don't call me fake news, but you have to wonder, with churches changing and companies changing, will the Senate change? Will you meet less frequently? Will you vote, electronically? Do you see any changes in the future, or do you think that would be a mistake?
I think there are some that are happening. For instance, we have committee hearings that are either all online or a mixture of that, where some people will be in the room and some people are doing online. That's never happened before. That's an enormous change in Senate world. But it's been interesting to see the House in the month of June is meeting a total of 3 days. In the entire month, the House is meeting 3 days. The Senate is in session every weekday, all through June. So it's been interesting to be able to see the difference between how the House is addressing this and how the Senate is addressing it. The Senate's focused in on, we've got to be able to still get our work done. The House, I guess, is just getting a message from Nancy Pelosi, show up and vote on what I tell you to show up on, and then we'll vote and then we'll leave again. We're still trying to be able to engage in the issues that need to be addressed.
We've talked about the fact that you spent much of your life as a minister. Obviously, your faith is front and center in your life, including your public life. We're seeing this rise of racial disharmony. What's your message to your constituents, to our viewers? We've all read about the terrible race riots of the last century in Tulsa and what that means today. Do you have hope here as well on this question of race?
I do have some hope on the issue of race. We as a nation are taking this on in a way that many other nations are not. And I can show you what I mean by that. When you watch the athletes march in the Olympics during the opening ceremony, almost every nation that marches in, every athlete looks exactly the same until you get to the United States. And there's great diversity among our athletes. And you see, it's not that there's no diversity in other nations. There are areas of diversity in other nations. They're just not allowed to participate. And we as a country have taken this head on to try to deal with this. Now we have 400 years of history that we're also trying to be able to knock down. And for people that say to me, we have a black president, we have black billionaires, we have black business leaders, we're done with race. I say to them, no, we're not. We've made a lot of progress on race, but we're not complete on race. When Tim Scott, as an African-American senator from South Carolina, can talk about being pulled over even in Washington, D.C. for driving while black, I've never been pulled over in Washington, D.C. So there are issues that are still undone. And so we need to be able to make sure that we do complete those. But we are working to do this. So I try to put out a simple message. My statement to people is very clear. Has your family ever invited a family of another race to your home for a meal? And many people that I ask that question to will respond back, I have friends of another race. And I'll just say, that's not what I asked. Yeah. Has your family ever invited a family of another race into your home for a meal so that your kids see you interacting with people of another race, developing friendships, being the role model that we need to be? Because race is not a legislative issue. It's a heart issue and it's a family issue. And it only gets dealt with when families and individuals take on the issue of race in their own life. Now, there are legislative things we can do to provide greater transparency. There are. And there are common sense things that are out there to provide greater transparency that we could all agree to. But in the meantime, I don't want to denigrate all police officers and say they're all bad folks. They're not. We are so grateful for what law enforcement is doing around the country. They get even probably more frustrated than the rest of the community does on bad cops that are in the midst because they destroyed their reputation in the midst. So we can take some of those things on while we still as individuals take on the issue of race and show some real progress. And we should lead the way, and America has led the way and should.
Yeah, I like this distinction. We know that there's racism in America, but I reject the idea that America is racist. And I like what you've said. If you think about the long history of the over 200 years of the American experiment, we had a civil war, we passed 3 civil rights amendments. This question about race has been front and center. I don't know if we can ever get to the point where we feel like we have it resolved. Maybe it'll always be a part of our conversation. It's a big mistake not to talk about it. And it's a bigger mistake when voices are being told that they can't be heard because of their race or because they have their own viewpoint on things. America will survive these moments when America talks to each other about these moments. I love your suggestion about who you invite over to dinner. I'd like to broaden it to say, hey, if you haven't had a hardcore liberal or a socialist over to dinner, have them over. Let's work on everybody. Let's make sure we can bring racial harmony to the country, but also get this idea again that we're all Americans and there's got to be some things that we hold in common. And your example and all this, Senator Lankford, on criminal justice reform and all manner of things focusing on strong families and taking care of kids. I just want you to know how much we appreciate you.
Matt, thanks very much. I tell people all the time, a national conversation on race is not a bunch of elected leaders with the cameras around them talking about race. A national conversation on race happens in kitchen tables and dining room tables all around the country where individual families break down the barriers and take the next step to develop some deeper relationships, to develop not friendly, but friends.
I'd rather be in dining rooms than courtrooms, Senator, and I'm worried about where things are going. And so your calming voice is needed. Keep it up. Thanks for being on CPAC Live. We're now going to show a quick video with Tony Dungy talking about the importance of fatherhood. Stay tuned.
Can you tell the audience how many children you have?
We have 10 children.
10.
Yeah, it's a household.
10 children. 7 of whom are adopted, and in addition to your 10 children, you also take in foster children, help with foster kids.
We do fostering, and we love it. It's been such a blessing to have children come into our homes and spend time with us.
Lauren, how? How do you do that?
You know, a lot of prayer goes into our lives. Every day we are praying for that wisdom and that guidance, but our faith is important. Mm-hmm. It really just dictates how we live our lives.
And welcome back, everyone, to CPAC Live. We're now joined by a really special guest, Denise White, who's had a great American life, which has many, many chapters still to go. And it has a most important thing to talk to us about, which is dealing with the foster care system in America. Denise is the CEO of EAG Sports Management. She is an agent to lots of famous people you know, and is a great American success story. Denise, thanks for being with us on CPAC Live.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I'm appreciative of having the opportunity today.
So I think there's not very much people can agree on politically, it seems like, anymore, but hopefully yet one of the areas that all of us can agree on is if we don't raise our kids right, it's going to be hard to have a country that's running in the right way. So we got to take care of our kids. This is something that's most especially on your heart.
Yes, it is. I came from the system, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. I was born to a a mentally ill mother. I have a twin sister, and unfortunately, she wasn't able to take care of us. Obviously, this is quite a few years ago. Back then, also, the laws were a little bit different. The rules were a little bit different, and grandparents didn't have any legal rights back then either. They really tried to get children just into foster care. It wasn't necessarily with a person that was related to them like they really try to do now. And so I became part of the system at a very young age. I think the first time I was admitted into a foster care home was when I was almost 2. And subsequently, I kept going back and forth from my mother to foster care situations until I was about 6, 7. And then eventually I was placed with my grandmother, which was great for me. My sister, unfortunately, was not. She was placed in another foster care home and subsequently then adopted by a family that unfortunately abused her. And then she was put back into the system again, and then readopted by a single woman. So yes, the foster care system is very close and near and dear to my heart. I think this day and age, there's a lot that needs to be readjusted, I guess you could say. The laws then were so much different than they are now, and the rules then. My sister and I were separated. Today, you would never think of trying to separate siblings, let alone twins, right?
Yeah.
Much different today.
Let me ask you a question about that specifically. We've all read the horror stories of what happens with foster care and, people that come out of it that have trouble, building other relationships because they're so broken. Is being put, the fact that you were given, your grandmother was given custody of you, if you're given to a functional family member, are your percentages of coming through that system just much, much higher?
Much higher. And they've, the ability to learn, love, learn the caring from one person to another, really is established at a very young age, right? I think up until 5 and your brain is still, developing. But I really, and I say this in many interviews that I do, many speeches that I give, my grandmother saved my life. And I really believe that because the love that I received from her, from a family member, was invaluable to me as a child. And I do remember the issues that I had in the foster care system, not feeling loved, not feeling wanted, not feeling a part of that family for whatever the reasons were, whether it was just me isolating myself as a child because I was scared, or because the family really saw me as a meal ticket and not necessarily a child. So yeah, I do believe that 100%, Matt.
The other thing that I think most people want to know about is, you see these kids that come from these terrible tragedies. You talked about your own tragedy with your mom. Do you think most people involved in the system, as you said, are trying to do the right thing? They are well-meaning. They are trying to do what's best for the kids, or are they just, kind of like being bureaucratic and just pushing through a broken system?
I think the people at the lower levels are absolutely trying to do the right thing. Our foster care system is just so overworked right now. We don't, with the need and the want are, they're not matching up in the sense of people wanting to be foster care parents and the need for those foster care parents. Right now, we've over 440,000 children in foster care in the United States. And that need is not matching the availability of parents. So then there becomes that rhetoric of the system, well, let's just place them where we can, right? And the first and foremost goal of the foster care system is to reunite children with their parents. But because a lot of times you can't do that, whether the children or the parents are incarcerated, we have a huge opioid problem in this country, and a lot of these children are coming from those situations. And quite honestly, a majority of those children are white children, by the way. 193,000 of our children in the foster care system are white, and then the next race down from that is Black children. So a huge opioid crisis in this country that's lending to the foster care system. And the other problem with this, too, Matt, is 70% of these children, if they don't get the right direction, 70% of them, which is a huge statistic, huge number, will end up on government assistance after they've phased out of the foster care system. So we're really, I think, to answer your question, I think there's a lot of people that really want to help. I don't think that there's enough there's the better system in place to help these children through this process. And I think that's something that needs reform.
we're having all this talk about first responders with the Chinese corona outbreak and people that are putting their lives on the line. But I also think specifically with cops and other first responders, when you come from a broken family, a family with violence, did you ever have an episode as you were growing up where, someone on the police force stepped in a way that was positive for you, or was your experience more negative?
No, I never really, when I was taken away, I remember the very day, the last day of me being taken away. I was taken away a few times. I don't necessarily remember the police. I remember the doctors coming to get my mom.
How old had you have been at this point, Denise? You said you were really young.
At that age, the last point, I think I was about 5.
Okay.
When I finally was not to ever go back to my mother, right? I'd been back and forth for quite a few years. And then I think it was 5 or 6 when I finally left her for good. And she was she lost all of her parental rights with me and my sister. I've never had a bad experience with the police, but what I can tell you is that a quick story, when my mother would have episodes when I was growing up, because I ended up taking care of my mother as I grew up. Unfortunately, one day the police had to be called because my mom was having what we like to call an episode. And I was so grateful for them because they were so kind. And one of the officers followed me I was bawling. I was a teenager. I was 18 years old. And she had to be admitted into the mental ward of a hospital. And I remember that police officer following me and getting there and just making sure I was okay, because he knew this was, my grandmother usually did that. And at this point, my grandmother couldn't do it anymore. And so it was finally my turn to take care of my mother. And it was I'll never forget that day. It was a moment that I really was appreciative, very appreciative.
So you talk about you're at these tender ages and you're having to go through these grown-up experiences at a young age. And if you fast forward and you look at all the success you're having out there on the West Coast as really a big deal agent, how do you explain that? I mean, it was just, did something get sparked in your brain where it's like, I'm going to make it no matter what happens?
Well, I think you're born with some of this. I really do, Matt. And I also think some of it is learned. And one thing I've done some research on is when you take a child or twins, and this is actually the twin version of this statistic, or not necessarily statistic, but some information that I found. When you put 2 children in a do or die situation, one becomes the leader, right? Because out of necessity, right? When I was found on the chair cooking rancid hamburger because me and my sister were hungry, I didn't necessarily know the rancid hamburger was green. I didn't know what that was. I knew that me and my sister were hungry. And so I was going to do what it took to make sure we were fed. Or when we stole from a 7-Eleven because we were hungry. So those things, one becomes the leader. And although my sister is probably the leader in our group now, back then I took that role. And they show when twins are developing, one, and they're in a situation of desperation, one will become the leader. So I think it's also something that I think it was innate in me, but I also think it was something that you learn because you have to survive. So it's you go into survival mode. And I don't necessarily think I ever lost that. I think I've always, I grew up with a grandmother who was extremely independent, who showed me if I wanted something, I had to work extra hard for it. And so I think that portion was learned, but I also think I received it at a very young age because I had to, not necessarily because I wanted to. But I'm actually very appreciative over it because it's helped me be successful today.
I recently watched the documentary on PBS on Clarence Thomas, who was raised by his grandparents, the role your grandmother played in your life. It sounds like a message, or at least something that is a theme with a lot of these kids that have to go through foster care, that if they have a grandparent that has the ability, the facilities to take care of them, that can be a lifesaver. Maybe we ought to be doing a lot more to cherish the older generations and our grandparents. They can do so much for our kids and their grandkids.
I agree 100%. Grandparents have, I grew up, my grandmother was very old fashioned. And at the time, of course, we all, even with our parents, were like, I can't believe she's making me do this, or I can't believe I have to do that. And now I look back and I'm like, thank you, Nana, right? Thank you so much for instilling those morals, those ethics. Back then I was mad because I was like, you're not letting me be a teenager. But now I'm so happy that she was strict with me, right? And strict in a loving, very loving, compassionate way. But taught me how to be a good person, taught me what a work ethic is, taught me how to have good morals and love people and love animals. And just, she was a phenomenal woman. And I really believe that children today, especially in the foster care system, they have the ability to go to a family member, a grandparent, a grandmother, a grandfather, someone that's going to love them and help them grow. I absolutely promote that. And I hope that that's what the foster care system is trying to do today. I just think they're overworked, they're underpaid. I think the system needs reform. And I'd love to be a part of that somehow. I'd love to help that group grow and these children have opportunities and hope, right? Because I think a lot of these children see no hope, and I would really like to be a part of that at some point.
Well, government doesn't always get things right. They're made of oftentimes people that mean well, and having people like yourself outside who are successful in the private sector, to me, it always seems like your energy and innovation could make a big difference, and so much so that I hear they're going to make a movie about your life. Is this right?
Yes, they are. Yes.
To know that.
Yes, yeah. Ben's Journal did a huge article on me a few years back, and which was a surprise because I'm usually behind the scenes, and ironically, Hollywood found it interesting, awesome. And so we've been Jennifer Aniston's production company, and Jennifer Aniston, I have a deal with them, and we're in the process now. Corona's put a few things on hold, but I'm a patient girl. So yeah, it's been honestly, it's nothing I ever dreamed of, and quite honestly, the attention is not something I'm used to. But if this is what I say about this whole thing, that it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's great, and if it can help one child or one person in this world, let them know that there's going to be hope for your future. Your circumstances don't define you. That's and right. You have the ability to change your life if you want to. And if that movie does that for just one person, then I will be happy that I said yes to it.
And you can be a victim, but you don't have to live your whole life as a victim. And that's
exactly
important for people to know. Denise White, thank you for being with us on CPAC Live. Your life is an inspiration. And I think for a lot of the people that have been watching this show over the course of the last couple months that was born out of this whole idea of quarantining and shutting down the economy, it's nice to talk about something that isn't political. Most people who would call themselves conservatives don't believe that everything in life is political. And I think something that people who are well-meaning on the left and the right and the center everywhere can say, look, let's do what's right by our kids. I try to do that as a dad. I think that there's many, many, many heroes who are foster parents who try to do that as well. And there are people in the system, including our first responders, who are reaching out to these kids. So Denise, thanks for being on. Like I said, you're inspirational. I hope you get to keep talking, because my guess is in order to make a change in a system, it's going to take a lot of collaboration and a lot of work to get it done. Thanks everybody for tuning in to CPAC Live. We will see you Wednesday.